The season that did not explain itself. The night settles before anything important happens. It always does. This is the hour when history stops performing and begins resting its weight on the floor. Lamps are low, air is still. The day has already given up trying to be memorable. Late night history prefers this moment because nothing competes for attention. There are no announcements, no turning points, only a quiet agreement between darkness and endurance. Tonight we are not entering a dramatic year. We are entering a modest one. A year that arrived without promise and left without apology. A season that did not explain itself and never felt the need to. Before you drift any deeper, if this quiet helps you feel safe tonight, you are welcome to stay with us. Subscribing softly keeps this place gentle and lets these nights continue. Now rest. Nothing here will rush you. Along the Nile, in a village that history never bothered to decorate with adjectives, the year unfolds with restrained expectations. The river arrives lower than usual, not low enough to panic, just low enough to notice. The banks expose more of themselves than people prefer. Mud dries too early. The waterline retreats without commentary. The river does not apologize. It does not offer reasons. It simply arrives as it is. This is not a disaster year. It is something more exhausting. It is a year that requires adjustment without permission. The village does not gather to discuss it. Meetings are for problems that believe in solutions. This year does not. People notice the river the way they notice an ache that does not justify complaint, but also refuses to disappear. Fields are measured by habit rather than optimism. Seed is spread because that is what happens next. No one expects abundance. No one expects failure. Expectation has learned to keep a low profile. Late night history likes these moments because they lack performance. There is no urgency demanding interpretation. Life continues not because it is inspired, but because stopping would be more complicated. The river sets the tone by doing less. Everyone else follows. Morning arrives quietly. It always does. Labor begins before the sun grows confident. Not for virtue, for temperature. Bodies bend into work that does not feel heroic. Hands know what to do without being reminded. Soil resists slightly more than usual. It is not hostile. It is just less cooperative. Tools feel heavier, not because they are, because people are. Children move through the same spaces as adults. There is no ceremony marking when work begins. It simply absorbs them. This is not cruelty. It is logistics. A household cannot afford symbols when calories are uncertain. No one makes speeches about responsibility. Responsibility arrives anyway. The houses stand as they always have. Walls of packed earth carry new cracks and keep old ones. Repairs wait because they can. A roof that still holds is considered loyal. Space is shared without comment. Privacy is a luxury that requires surplus, and surplus did not attend this year. Water becomes something counted by habit, not measured with tools, measured with memory. The well drops faster than expected. Buckets rise slower. No one argues because arguments do not add depth. Water is reused. Hands are washed carefully. Clothes are rinsed with restraint, not because restraint is admired, because exhaustion discourages waste. Meals arrive with less ceremony. Portions shrink without announcement. Ingredients remain familiar. There is comfort in repetition even when quantity fades. People eat together because that is efficient. Conversation thins because talking costs energy. Silence is not awkward. It is economical. This is a good year for listening to footsteps, for noticing how often people sit, for observing how evenings begin earlier because bodies decide they have done enough. There is no entertainment schedule. Stories do not grow elaborate. They do not need to. Everyone already knows how tomorrow will look. The empire remains distant and present at the same time. Records arrive. Numbers behave as if the river did its job properly. The village responds without drama. Adjustments are made quietly. Consumption narrows. Reserves become imaginary. Compliance is not enthusiastic. It is practiced. History often mistakes this for acceptance. It is closer to fatigue. Late-night history does not correct this misunderstanding. It lets it sit. Fatigue explains more than rebellion ever could. Health becomes a background concern. Weakness is not named unless it interferes with movement. Pain is described vaguely. Rest is negotiated carefully. No one is surprised when someone slows down. Everyone understands the turns are taken without notice. As the year continues, it never announces itself as memorable. There is no midpoint, no revelation, just a series of days that require patience rather than courage. The river remains itself. The land responds unevenly. People adapt with minimal commentary. This is the kind of year that does not leave monuments. It leaves habits. It teaches the body how to conserve without pride. It teaches attention without philosophy. It teaches survival without lessons. Late-night history prefers to end here, not with resolution, with persistence. The season does not conclude. It loosens its grip slowly. At some point, the river rises again. No one celebrates. Celebration requires energy. Instead, there is a subtle release. A sense that effort will soon be repaid with less resistance. The village remains unnamed. The people remain unrecorded. The year slips past historians because it never asked to be remembered, and that is precisely why it belongs here in the quiet hours, where history is not a spectacle, where endurance does not need applause, where rest arrives without explanation and no one asks it to justify itself. If you are still here, that is enough. Nothing more is required tonight. Break time equals 3.0 seconds / greater than 2 when the Nile did less than expected. The night opens gently as if the river itself has decided not to make an entrance. This is the hour when large forces appear smaller, not because they shrink, but because no one is watching closely enough to applaud. Late-night history prefers this moment. It is when power stops announcing itself and simply exists. The Nile, usually generous with drama, chooses restraint. No flood worthy of stories, no catastrophe worth naming. Just a quiet underperformance, the kind that makes people tired rather than afraid, the kind that history often forgets because it refuses to be spectacular. In this village, the river arrives lower than memory would prefer. Not shockingly low, not enough to justify alarm, just low enough to be noticed by feet that walk its edge every day. The bank shows more skin than usual. Mud dries earlier. The waterline pulls back with no interest in explaining itself. The river does not negotiate. It never has. It simply does less. No one gathers to argue with it. There are no raised voices aimed at the water. Complaints require the belief that someone is listening. The river has never encouraged that belief. People observe, they adjust, they continue. This is not resignation, it is familiarity. The Nile has taught this lesson before. The soil feels different underfoot. It resists slightly, not enough to stop work, enough to make it slower. Tools sink less easily. Hands linger longer. The earth is not hostile. It is just less helpful. Late night history finds something honest here. Nature is not cruel. It is indifferent in a very specific way. It does not react to disappointment. Farmers do not change their routines dramatically. Drastic change suggests optimism or panic. Neither feels appropriate. Seeds are sown according to habit. Fields are measured by memory rather than hope. There is no ceremony marking this adjustment. Bodies learn it quietly. Muscles remember where the water should have been. Children notice first, not because they understand the river, but because they notice everything. The way bare ground stretches farther, the way feet pick up more dust, the way adults pause longer before speaking. No one explains it to them. Explanation implies comfort. They learn instead through repetition, through watching hands slow down, through evenings that arrive a little earlier. The riverbank becomes a place of observation rather than use. Fewer jars are filled without thought, fewer careless steps. Water is approached with respect that feels almost professional, not reverent, practical. Buckets are lowered with patience. Ropes are checked twice. Waste is discouraged without speeches. Late night history enjoys this lack of instruction. No one gives lessons. Everyone already knows. The Nile has always been unreliable in the most reliable way possible. As days pass, the absence becomes normal. That is the most unsettling part. Scarcity that does not escalate learns how to blend in. The river settles into its smaller role. People follow. Expectations shrink quietly, not officially, emotionally. This is not a year of dramatic hunger. It is a year of subtle calculation, of counting without writing, of measuring meals by feel. The river does not announce when it might improve. It offers no schedule. It behaves like a coworker who stops trying but keeps showing up. You cannot fire it. You cannot praise it. You simply work around it. The banks hold their shape stubbornly. They dry and crack without apology. Fish retreat to deeper channels. Their absence is noticed but not mourned. Mourning requires time. Time is better spent adjusting nets that now feel optimistic. At night, the river sounds different, quieter, less confident. Or maybe it is the same sound heard differently, with less expectation attached to it. People sleep knowing tomorrow will ask for more effort than it gives back. This knowledge does not keep them awake. It is familiar enough to be boring. Late night history does not frame this as a moral lesson. There is nothing to learn except how to continue. The Nile does not punish. It withholds. Withholding is more effective. It teaches patience without language. By the time the season settles fully into itself, no one is waiting for explanation. The river has done what it does best. It has reminded everyone that consistency is a luxury, that survival often depends not on abundance but on tolerance for less. This stretch of low water will not earn a name. It will not be marked on calendars. It will exist only in adjusted posture and smaller gestures, in fields that produce slightly less and bodies that work slightly harder. And when the river eventually rises again, it will not apologize. It never does. It will simply resume doing more, as if nothing happened, as if it was never noticed at all. Late night history finds peace in that. The same seeds in less promising ground. The river has already stepped back. That much is settled. What follows does not arrive as a decision. It arrives as routine. Late night history understands this transition well. After the absence is noticed, there is always a stretch where nothing visibly changes. Schedules remain intact. Movements repeat. From a distance, it might appear that the year continues normally. This illusion is comforting and completely inaccurate. What changes is not the plan, but the outcome. And outcomes do not announce themselves until much later. The planting calendar does not adjust. It rarely does. Calendars are stubborn objects. They remember better years with unfair confidence. Seeds are placed into the soil at the expected time. Hands move with the same gestures learned long ago. Rows are marked by memory rather than measurement. There is no ceremony to acknowledge the difference. Doing so would require admitting uncertainty, and uncertainty is exhausting. The soil receives the seed without enthusiasm. It accepts the offering and offers nothing back in return, at least not immediately. Late night history enjoys this quiet negotiation. No promises are exchanged, no guarantees implied. The ground is not offended. It simply behaves according to its current mood, which is dry and slightly indifferent. People do not record this year in writing. There is no time and no reason. Writing suggests that someone later will care. Bodies keep the record instead. Backs bend a little longer than usual. Knees complain sooner. Hands linger in the dirt, as if checking for reassurance that never quite arrives. Muscles remember resistance where softness should have been. This memory does not live in words. It settles into posture, a slight change in how weight is shifted, a habit of pausing before standing upright. These are not conscious decisions, they are responses, the kind history prefers because they do not require explanation. Late night history has always been interested in what people continue doing, even when it stops working as well. There is something quietly ironic in repeating a plan that no longer guarantees reward. Not because people are foolish, because alternatives are scarce. Change requires excess, and excess is not available this season. Seeds disappear into the soil with no drama. There is no sense of ceremony, no hope attached that would risk disappointment. The act is practical, necessary, unromantic. Hands know this motion well enough to perform it without optimism. The soil closes over the seed, as if nothing important happened. Days pass. The surface of the field offers little feedback. Sprouts appear unevenly. Some areas respond as expected. Others remain stubbornly blank. No one is surprised. Surprise would suggest that expectation was present. It was not. Late night history appreciates this emotional economy. No energy is wasted on disappointment that offers no benefit. Attention shifts instead to effort. If the ground will not give freely, then it must be persuaded. Persuasion takes time, and backs feel this immediately. Labor stretches longer, not dramatically, just enough to be noticed by the body. Hands spend more time touching the earth, not out of affection, out of assessment. Fingers press into soil to judge moisture that is rarely sufficient. The ground answers honestly, always honestly. It is dry. It has been dry for a while. It does not intend to apologize. This is how bodies learn things that documents never record. A written account might note a low yield. It would not mention how long a person hesitated before standing up straight, or how often someone paused to rest without sitting because sitting would make standing more difficult later. Late night history prefers the story told by joints rather than ink. The repetition of planting without reward produces a quiet humor that no one comments on. The same actions performed with slightly less confidence. The same gestures repeated with growing awareness that effort does not always scale with outcome. There is something almost polite about this arrangement. The land does not mock the people. The people do not accuse the land. Both simply continue. Evenings arrive with a heavier silence, not because conversation has ended, because there is less appetite for commentary. Food will come later, or it will not. Either way, discussing it does not help. People sit. Bodies cool down slowly. The day settles into muscles that will complain again tomorrow. Children observe these changes without interpretation. They notice that adults lean forward more often, that hands are slower to release tools, that mornings feel earlier. No one explains it to them. Explanation would turn experience into instruction. Experience is sufficient. Late night history finds something unsettling in how easily this adjustment becomes normal, how quickly a reduced expectation blends into routine, how a poorer outcome can be absorbed without ceremony. There is no moment where someone declares that the year is harder. It simply behaves that way, and everyone accommodates. The seeds continue their quiet work beneath the surface. Some will emerge, others will not. The soil does not distinguish between them. It does not keep score. It does not reward persistence. It responds only to conditions, and conditions remain unchanged. The season moves forward not because it is confident, but because time does not pause for assessment. Fields are tended, weeds are pulled with less enthusiasm. Harvest is imagined cautiously. The calendar insists that everything is on schedule. Bodies know better. Late night history does not rush this moment. It allows the repetition to settle. It allows the irony to remain gentle. The same seeds, the same motions, less return, and yet no one stops planting. Fields that promised nothing. The night settles into a familiar quiet before the fields appear again. This is the hour when effort looks smaller than it felt during the day. Late night history prefers to arrive here when hands have stopped moving and memory does the work instead. Nothing dramatic happened in these fields today. That is precisely the point. The work continued. The soil resisted politely. The plants responded unevenly. No one was surprised. This season has already explained itself through repetition. It offers no speeches and expects no applause. In this year, barley is sown with restraint, not because anyone dislikes it, because trust has limits. Barley is reliable but not generous. It survives without gratitude. Wheat is approached with caution. It has a reputation that does not age well in dry seasons. It asks for more than the land seems willing to give, so less of it is planted, not announced, just quietly decided through hands that hesitate before releasing seed. Late night history enjoys this kind of decision-making. No debate, no leadership, just bodies adjusting without paperwork. Seeds fall into the soil with lowered expectations. Rows are spaced wider than usual. This is not optimism. It is strategy disguised as habit. Fewer plants mean fewer disappointments later. The ground receives them without enthusiasm. It does not reject them. It simply does not encourage them. The soil remains firm where softness is preferred. Dryness lingers beneath the surface like a stubborn opinion. Weeds appear with irritating confidence. They require less negotiation. They do not wait for ideal conditions. They arrive early and often. Their green spreads unevenly but persistently. There is a quiet irony in how easily they thrive. Late night history allows itself a small smile here. The plants no one asked for seem perfectly comfortable. Farmers notice this without commentary. Pulling weeds becomes a regular task. Not aggressive, not angry, just necessary. The weeds are not blamed. Blame suggests expectations. Expectations were lowered earlier. The land does not argue, it does not rebel, it simply fails to cooperate. This distinction matters. Resistance implies intent. The soil has none, it responds only to moisture, and there is not enough of it. It holds together stubbornly. Cracks appear and remain. Footsteps kick up dust that lingers longer than it should. Bodies adapt quickly, knees bend differently. Backs learn new angles. Hands press into the soil more often, checking for moisture that is rarely present. This checking becomes habitual. Fingers already know the answer but still ask. Not out of hope, out of habit. Late night history pays attention to habits because they reveal more than plans. Plans assume cooperation. Habits assume reality. As weeks pass, the fields begin to show uneven growth. Some patches respond as expected, others remain quiet. Green appears where the soil is slightly kinder, elsewhere the surface stays bare. No one points this out. It is obvious without being stated. Conversations do not linger on it. There is nothing to resolve. This is not a year that invites imagination. Future harvests are pictured cautiously, not avoided, just softened. No one builds dreams that require surplus. That would be irresponsible. Work continues at a steady pace, not frantic, not hopeful. Steady is safer. Tools scrape against harder ground. Blades dull faster. Repairs happen quietly. A handle wrapped with cloth. A crack tied with cord. Replacement is postponed because postponement is a skill. Late night history appreciates this economy. Nothing wasted. Not even frustration. Frustration burns energy, and energy is scarce. Evenings arrive with dust still clinging to skin. Clothes are shaken out with care. Water is used sparingly. Meals follow the same pattern as before, but portions feel smaller against effort that feels larger. No one comments on this mismatch. Commenting would not change it. Children move through the fields watching more than working. They notice the weeds. They notice the gaps. They notice how adults pause longer before standing upright. No explanation is given. None is required. Observation is enough. The fields at night appear calm. Moonlight flattens their imperfections. From a distance, everything looks even. Late night history finds this misleading and comforting at the same time. The surface hides the unevenness that bodies know well. The ground looks cooperative in the dark. It is a polite illusion. By now, everyone understands that this season is not generous. It does not pretend to be. It offers survival without elegance. Crops will grow. Just not equally. Just not abundantly. This knowledge settles into routine. The land is not blamed. Blame would imply that fairness was promised. It was not. The river did less. The soil responded accordingly. The fields reflect this relationship without drama. Late night history lingers here because nothing is resolved. The fields continue to promise nothing. And still they are tended. Still they are watched. Still they are worked. Not because hope demands it, because stopping would require more explanation than continuing. And so the fields remain, uneven, reluctant, quiet, and tomorrow they will be worked again. Tools that refused to be replaced. The night reaches a point where attention shifts away from the fields and settles on the things that touch them most often. Late night history enjoys this moment because it reveals how endurance actually functions, not through grand decisions, but through objects that are asked to keep working long after their usefulness should have expired. This is the quiet hour when tools are inspected under low light, when hands run along worn wood without expectation of improvement, when replacement is considered briefly and dismissed without discussion. Not because better tools do not exist, because this season does not invite upgrades. The tools in this village are old in the way that only useful things become. Their age is not counted in years, but in repairs. A handle wrapped so many times it has lost its original shape. A blade sharpened unevenly, because precision requires patience, and patience has already been spent elsewhere. Nothing here matches. Nothing was meant to. Late night history finds comfort in this asymmetry. It suggests survival rather than ambition. No one replaces a tool unless it fails completely. Failure is defined narrowly. As long as it can still perform the basic motion, it is kept. A hoe that bends slightly is still a hoe. A plow that cuts unevenly still cuts. Efficiency is desirable but not required. Perfection would be suspicious. Repairs happen without ceremony. Rope appears. Wood scraps are fitted where they should not fit. Cracks are bound rather than filled. The goal is not beauty. The goal is continuation. Each fix is temporary by design. No one pretends otherwise. Temporary is the only option available, and it performs well enough. Late night history enjoys the honesty of this arrangement. No promises are made to the future. Everything here exists for today. Tomorrow will bring its own adjustments. There is a particular sound that worn tools make when they meet resistant soil. It is duller, less confident, a scrape rather than a slice. Hands recognize this sound immediately. It means more effort will be required. No one reacts outwardly. Shoulders lower slightly. Grip tightens. The body adjusts without commentary. Tools are shared carefully, not because they are rare, because borrowing increases responsibility. When something breaks, it must be explained. Explanation costs energy. People prefer to avoid it, so tools pass between hands with caution. They are returned in the same condition if possible. If not, they are returned with silence. Silence acknowledges damage without assigning blame. Late night history notices how blame is avoided here. Not out of kindness, out of practicality. Everyone understands that failure is already present. Assigning it to a person would be inefficient. Children learn to repair before they learn to replace. Replacement is a concept that belongs to surplus. Surplus does not attend this season, so they learn knots. They learn how to select a piece of wood that bends without snapping. They learn which cracks can be ignored and which cannot. These lessons arrive early and remain useful. The tools themselves become records. Each mark tells a story no one feels compelled to tell aloud. A nick from a careless strike, a bend from ground that refused to cooperate, a handle darkened where hands rest most often. These objects remember effort better than people do. Late night history prefers objects that remember. People are unreliable. Objects tell the truth quietly. As the season continues, the relationship between body and tool becomes more intimate. With no expectation of replacement, there is a kind of respect that forms. Not affection, awareness. A person learns exactly how much force a handle can tolerate, how far a blade can be pushed before it complains. This knowledge is specific, personal, transferred by demonstration rather than instruction. Repairs accumulate, a rope here, a wedge there. The tool grows heavier, more awkward. It requires more attention. This is accepted. Attention replaces efficiency. The cost is time. Time is available. Energy is not. Late night history finds a gentle irony in how these tools reflect the season itself. They do less than expected. They require more effort. They do not break dramatically. They simply wear down slowly and ask to be tolerated. No one expects the tools to save the harvest. That would be unreasonable. The tools are not heroes. They are companions. They share the same limitation as the people who use them. They function. That is enough. Evenings bring maintenance rather than rest. Handles are checked, bindings tightened, blades scraped clean with care that borders on tenderness, not because the tools are loved, because tomorrow will ask for them again. There is no talk of improvement, no speculation about better equipment. Those conversations belong to different years. Years when the river cooperates. Years when surplus allows imagination. This year does not invite such thinking. Late night history lingers here because this is where resignation becomes skill, where acceptance turns practical, where survival is expressed through knots and bindings rather than hope. The tools remain imperfect. The repairs remain temporary. The season remains difficult. And still, the work continues. Not because anyone believes it will pay off, but because stopping would require replacing more than tools. It would require replacing habit. And habit is the most durable thing this village owns. Labor without a name. The night loosens its grip slowly, not because it is finished, but because work is about to begin. Late night history prefers this hour, when effort exists without witnesses and meaning has not yet been assigned. The air is cooler, the ground is quieter. Muscles wake before thought does. This is not an inspiring moment. It is a practical one. No one calls it discipline, no one calls it sacrifice. It is simply the time when bodies decide to move because waiting would make the day harder. History rarely writes about these hours. They do not argue for attention. They do not offer conclusions. They only repeat. Work begins before the sun becomes confident, not for virtue, not for tradition, because heat punishes hesitation. Everyone understands this without discussion. The body has learned it more effectively than language ever could. Movement starts slowly. Joints complain briefly and then accept their role. Breath settles into a rhythm that will last until midday. There is no ceremony marking the beginning of labor, no signal, no command. People simply stand up and begin. This work does not require permission. It does not wait for motivation. It arrives as a condition. Late night history finds something unsettling here. The most demanding labor does not announce itself. It blends into routine until it feels inevitable. Hands know what to do. They have been trained by repetition rather than instruction. The tasks are familiar enough to feel automatic. Lift, carry, bend, pull. These motions are not heroic. They are precise. Precision comes from necessity, not ambition. Mistakes cost energy. Energy is guarded carefully. This labor has no name because naming it would separate it from life. It is not a profession. It is not a duty. It is simply what fills the space between waking and rest. To name it would suggest that it could be avoided. It cannot. Children are present without being acknowledged as workers. They move alongside adults, absorbing tasks gradually. No one announces when they begin contributing. Contribution arrives quietly. Carrying becomes helping. Helping becomes expected. Expectation settles without conflict. Late-night history avoids sentimental language here. There is no stolen innocence. There is adaptation. Children learn early that effort is not optional. This lesson is not framed as harsh. It is framed as normal. Normal is powerful because it does not invite argument. The work itself changes little from day to day. What changes is the body performing it. Muscles grow accustomed to strain and then slightly less tolerant of it. Small adjustments appear. A pause before lifting, a shift in grip, a preference for certain movements that cost less effort. These adaptations are subtle. They do not require reflection. They happen because pain is an effective teacher. This is labor that does not accumulate pride. Pride requires recognition. Recognition requires an audience. This work has none. It is performed early and ends quietly. By the time others might notice, it has already been absorbed into the background. Late-night history finds irony in how essential this labor is and how invisible it remains. Entire harvests depend on it. Entire households rely on it. And yet it leaves no trace beyond fatigue. Voices remain low during these hours. Conversation is minimal, not because people dislike each other, because talking competes with breathing. Breath is prioritized. Words can wait. As the sun rises, the work continues without adjustment. The rhythm established in darkness holds. Bodies have committed. Stopping would require renegotiation, and renegotiation is tiring. So effort continues forward. This labor does not seek efficiency. It seeks endurance. Efficiency assumes replacement. Endurance assumes continuity. Nothing here is replaced easily. People learn to pace themselves not for today but for the week, or the month, or the season that shows no interest in improvement. Late-night history appreciates this long view. It is not hopeful. It is realistic. Rest arrives briefly and without celebration. A pause in the shade. A drink taken slowly. Muscles loosen slightly but not fully. Full relaxation would make standing again difficult. So rest remains cautious. Even recovery is measured. No one reflects on the fairness of this arrangement. Fairness implies alternatives. Alternatives are limited. The body accepts what the mind might resist. This acceptance is not philosophical, it is biological. As the day moves on, the early labor disappears into the larger pattern of work. What began in darkness blends into the ordinary. By midday, no one remembers exactly when it started. Fatigue has smoothed the edges. Late-night history stays with this moment because it explains more than dramatic events ever could. Civilizations do not persist because of ideals. They persist because unnamed labor repeats itself reliably. There are no songs written for this work, no records kept, no thanks exchanged, and yet it continues year after year with little variation. This is not because people lack imagination. It is because imagination does not move soil or carry water. Bodies do. As evening approaches, the work slows, not because it is finished, because bodies insist. Tools are set down carefully. Hands stretch without comment. The day closes quietly. Tomorrow this labor will begin again before the sun notices. It will remain unnamed. It will remain essential. And late-night history will remember it precisely because it was never meant to be remembered at all. Childhood without a margin. The night holds its breath a little longer before giving way to the softer sounds of movement. Late night history prefers this pause because it exposes what usually hides behind larger efforts. After the tools are set down and the labor settles into muscle memory, there is another presence that never fully leaves the scene. Smaller, quieter, observant. Childhood in this village does not announce itself. It does not ask for protection. It moves carefully along the edges of necessity. This is not a story of loss or tragedy. It is a story of adjustment so subtle that it rarely feels like a decision at all. Children are present long before anyone decides they should be. They appear beside adults the way shadows do. Without instruction, without ceremony, they are not called workers. That word would sound too formal, too heavy. Instead, they are called helpful, or nearby, or simply there. Language softens what reality already understands. They begin with tasks that seem harmless, carrying light objects, watching tools, walking messages from one place to another. None of this feels like labor because it does not interrupt anything that was scheduled. Childhood here has no fixed calendar. There is no moment when play officially ends. Play just becomes less urgent than contribution. Late night history notices how carefully the adults avoid naming this shift. Naming would turn it into a choice. Choices imply alternatives. Alternatives are scarce, so the transition remains quiet. Necessary things are done by whoever is closest and capable. Children are often both. No one teaches them responsibility through lectures. Responsibility arrives through repetition, through watching hands move, through copying gestures that seem important, through being trusted with small tasks that gradually stop feeling small. This trust is practical rather than symbolic. A child who can carry water saves someone else the trip. Efficiency matters more than intention. There is no expectation that children understand why they are needed. Understanding is optional. Participation is not. They learn the rhythm before they learn the reason, and the rhythm is persuasive. Once learned, it is difficult to unlearn. Late-night history avoids sentimental framing here. This is not innocence interrupted. It is innocence redirected. The child still notices the world, still asks questions internally, still feels boredom and curiosity. Those things do not disappear. They simply operate alongside obligation rather than ahead of it. Games happen in fragments, in pauses between tasks, in movements that resemble work but serve no purpose beyond momentary relief. A stick dragged through dust, a race to the shade, a laugh that arrives unexpectedly and leaves quickly. No one stops this. No one encourages it either. Play exists where it fits. As bodies grow, the tasks change. Carrying becomes lifting. Watching becomes assisting. Assistance becomes expectation. The language remains gentle. No one declares that childhood has ended. It simply stretches thinner each year until it fits entirely inside usefulness. Late-night history finds something unsettling in how efficient this process is. There is no rebellion, no dramatic resistance. The child adapts because adaptation is rewarded with inclusion. Being useful grants proximity to adults. Proximity grants safety. Safety matters more than leisure. The adults do not romanticize this arrangement. They do not defend it either. Defense would suggest guilt. Guilt requires a belief that something better was possible. This season does not encourage such beliefs. The river did less. The soil responded accordingly. Everyone adjusts. Children learn quickly which efforts matter. They learn which mistakes draw correction and which are ignored. They learn that exhaustion is normal, that rest must be brief, that complaining wastes breath. These lessons are not delivered harshly. They are absorbed naturally through observation. Late-night history is careful not to praise this resilience. Praise would turn adaptation into virtue. This is not virtue. It is logistics. It works. That is its only qualification. As evening arrives, children move more slowly. Their smaller bodies feel the day differently. Fatigue shows earlier. Adults notice this and adjust tasks accordingly, not out of sentiment, out of preservation. A tired child tomorrow is less useful than a rested one tonight. Care here is practical rather than emotional. There is quiet humor in how everyone pretends this is temporary, as if the next year might restore margins, as if surplus might return and push children back into something that resembles leisure. Late-night history allows itself a restrained smile. These hopes exist without being articulated. They are harmless because no one relies on them. At night, children fall asleep quickly. Their rest is deep, deeper than the adults. Their bodies recover faster. This efficiency is noticed and quietly relied upon. Tomorrow they will rise early again, not because they are told to, because the village moves and they move with it. No one marks these years as formative. No one keeps track of when a child first became necessary. Necessity does not keep records, it only repeats itself. Late-night history lingers here because this is where continuity is built. Not through instruction, not through ideals, through small hands, learning where they fit. Childhood in this village is not stolen. It is spent carefully, invested early, used efficiently. And like everything else this season touches, it leaves no monument, only habits. Habits that last far longer than anyone expects. Walls that learn to wait. The night drifts closer to the houses once the fields release their hold. Late-night history likes this transition because effort becomes quieter here. The work does not end, it simply changes texture. Instead of soil and tools, there are walls and roofs and spaces that continue existing without asking to be improved. This is the hour when buildings reveal their true role, not as shelter from storms or symbols of status, but as objects that tolerate time with minimal complaint. Nothing here is finished. Nothing is repaired completely. Everything waits. The houses in this village are not meant to impress. They are meant to remain standing. Their walls are made of packed earth mixed with whatever was available at the time: straw, gravel, memory. Over the years, cracks appear slowly. Thin lines at first, easy to ignore. They widen with heat and close slightly with cool nights. No one rushes to seal them. Urgency is reserved for things that fail completely. Late-night history notices how patience becomes structural here. A crack that does not collapse the wall is considered acceptable. Acceptable is a powerful word. It means effort can be postponed. Postponement is often mistaken for neglect. It is closer to calculation. Repair requires materials. Materials require time. Time requires energy. Energy is already committed elsewhere. So the wall waits, and it holds. The roofs are flat and stubborn, built to do very little and therefore capable of lasting a long time. During the day, they absorb heat without complaint. At night, they release it slowly. This behavior is understood intuitively. No one explains it. People simply sleep where the air feels tolerable. Knowledge here is physical rather than verbal. Late night history appreciates how buildings learn alongside people. The house adapts by aging, the occupants adapt by adjusting expectations. There is no illusion of comfort. Comfort suggests surplus. Surplus has not arrived this year. Inside the house's space is shared carefully, not because privacy is unwanted, because space is limited. Rooms serve multiple purposes without labels. Sleeping areas become storage during the day. Storage areas become sitting spaces at night. Objects are moved with familiarity. Nothing is precious enough to deserve a permanent place. The walls hold the marks of this movement. Smoothed areas where shoulders pass, darkened corners where hands rest. These marks are not cleaned away. Cleaning would suggest the marks are mistakes. They are not. They are evidence of use. Late night history avoids romanticizing this closeness. It is not intimacy, it is efficiency. Proximity reduces movement. Movement costs energy. Energy is guarded carefully. As cracks grow more visible, people notice them without alarm. A finger traces the line once, then the finger moves on. If a crack deepens too much, it will be addressed. Until then, it remains part of the wall. Like fatigue in a muscle, present but manageable. Repairs happen only when absolutely necessary. A piece of cloth pushed into a gap, a patch of mud applied unevenly. The goal is not to erase damage, it is to delay consequence. Delay is often enough. Late night history finds quiet humor in how permanence is treated here. Nothing is assumed permanent, and yet everything is expected to last. This contradiction works surprisingly well. The houses are cool at night, cooler than expected. The thick walls remember the absence of heat. They release it reluctantly. People gather where the air feels slowest. Sleep arrives quickly, not because the beds are comfortable, because the day has been efficient at exhausting the body. During the day, the same walls become burdensome. Heat settles inside. Air grows heavy. Doors remain open longer than planned. Shade is shared. No one complains. Complaints would require alternatives. Children learn the shape of these houses by touch. They know which walls are cooler, which corners stay dark longest, which cracks can be traced without causing dust to fall. This knowledge is not taught. It is accumulated. Late night history notices how houses become teachers. They teach patience. They teach restraint. They teach the difference between damage and failure. A wall that cracks is not failing. A wall that collapses is. This distinction shapes how people treat themselves as well. Furniture is minimal. Objects lean against walls rather than standing alone. This reduces stress on floors. Floors crack too. They are swept carefully, not thoroughly. Thoroughness is expensive. At night, sounds travel easily through these houses. Coughs, footsteps, shifts in sleep. No one expects silence. Silence would be suspicious. It would suggest emptiness. Late night history enjoys how these houses resist idealization. They do not pretend to be timeless. They age visibly. They accept repair awkwardly. They exist in negotiation with weather and use. The walls will crack more next year. That is understood. They always do. Plans are made vaguely. Maybe more mud will be applied, maybe not. It depends on how the season behaves. For now, the houses stand. They are not proud. They are not fragile. They simply continue. Late night history lingers here because this is where survival becomes architectural, not through strength, through tolerance. The walls do not ask to be fixed. They wait. And so does everyone else. Rooms that measured hunger. The night slips further indoors now, away from walls and into the space they contain. Late night history likes this shift because it reveals what people tolerate without complaint. Once the house proves it will not collapse, attention moves elsewhere. Comfort stops being negotiated. Beauty is dismissed without argument. What remains is the quiet arithmetic of survival. Space is not the problem. Space can always be rearranged. Hunger cannot. Hunger occupies everything without needing a corner. Inside these rooms, nothing feels especially wrong at first. People still sit, still sleep, still move around one another with practiced ease. The rooms are small but manageable. They always have been. No one measures discomfort in distance. Distance is irrelevant when the body is already tired. What matters is what arrives inside the body and how often. Late night history finds this distinction important. Crowding is visible, hunger is subtle. Crowding can be solved with posture and patience. Hunger requires calculation. Meals arrive quietly, not announced, not celebrated. Food appears the way effort does here, without ceremony. Bowls are filled carefully. Portions look intentional even when they are not. No one comments on size. Commenting would invite comparison, and comparison would invite dissatisfaction. The room does not react. It does not grow tense. It absorbs the meal as another routine. People eat without hurry, but also without indulgence. Chewing slows naturally, not for enjoyment, for duration. Stretching a meal is not considered strategy. It is instinct. Late night history notices how conversation thins during eating. Not because people are unhappy, because words compete with awareness. Eating requires attention when food is limited. Attention makes the act last longer. Silence is efficient. Children watch closely, not out of fear, out of habit. They learn early how much food looks normal. Normal adjusts quickly. Their understanding of enough is shaped quietly by repetition. No one tells them to eat less. Less simply arrives. The room itself is unconcerned. It does not demand decoration. Walls remain bare. Any surface that can hold an object does. Objects lean rather than stand. This creates more floor space. Floor space allows movement. Movement distracts from hunger. Late night history appreciates this unspoken design logic. Rooms are arranged not for appearance but for endurance. A beautiful room would be suspicious. Beauty implies time and surplus. Surplus has not been invited. Storage becomes more important than seating. Containers are placed where they can be watched, not guarded. Watched. Knowing where food is stored creates a sense of control, even when quantity is small. Control matters. It allows the body to relax slightly. No one hides food dramatically. That would draw attention. Instead, food remains visible but unremarkable. Visibility removes temptation to obsess. Obsession wastes energy. Late night history allows itself a dry amusement here. Scarcity handled openly often produces less conflict than abundance handled poorly. The rooms grow quieter as the evening progresses, not because people are finished eating, because eating has finished them. Hunger does not disappear. It settles. It becomes a background condition like heat or dust, noticeable but familiar. Sleeping arrangements do not change much. People sleep close together not for warmth but for habit. Shared space reduces awareness of individual discomfort. A restless night feels less personal when others shift as well. Late night history notes how hunger affects sleep. It does not prevent it. It deepens it. Bodies conserve energy aggressively. Dreams are brief. Rest is efficient. Morning will arrive with the same questions answered in advance. There will be food later. There will be less than desired. This knowledge is not distressing. It is established. The rooms carry this knowledge without comment. They do not echo complaints. They do not demand improvement. They simply contain bodies doing their best to persist. During the day, these rooms remain mostly empty. People avoid staying inside when possible. Activity distracts from appetite. Movement creates purpose. The room waits patiently for evening. Late night history lingers here because this is where priorities clarify. Space is not argued over. Decoration is not discussed. Cleanliness is maintained only where it serves health. Everything else is negotiable. A house does not need to be beautiful. Beauty does not feed anyone. A house does not need to be large. Size does not increase portions. A house needs only to remain standing long enough to shelter another meal, another night. Children grow accustomed to this logic. They do not complain about small rooms. They notice when bowls are lighter. They notice when adults pause before serving themselves. These observations become lessons, quiet ones. Late night history avoids moralizing this arrangement. There is no virtue here. There is adaptation. Adaptation does not ask to be praised. It asks to be allowed to continue. The rooms remain unchanged. Walls crack slowly. Floors hold. Space stays tight. None of this feels urgent. Urgency belongs to hunger alone. As night deepens, the rooms fill again with sleeping bodies. Breathing slows. The house holds them carefully. It does not offer comfort. It offers containment. That is enough. Tomorrow, the same rooms will serve the same purpose. They will not solve hunger. They will simply make it manageable. And late night history will remember them. Not for what they lacked, but for what they refused to collapse under. Water that refused to hurry. The night grows quieter around the well. This is where late night history prefers to begin because nothing dramatic ever happens here. No announcements, no crowds, just a rope, a bucket, and the steady patience of people who know that urgency does not improve outcomes. The air is cool enough to slow movement. The stars feel indifferent. Water waits below ground without concern for schedules. This is not a place for arguments. It is a place for rhythm. Tonight the rhythm is slower than memory would like. The well does not explain itself. It never does. It simply offers less and asks for more restraint in return. In this season, the well drops faster than expected. The sound of the bucket touching water comes later than it should. The rope feels longer in the hand. None of this is announced. It is noticed. The first sign is not panic. It is adjustment. People lower the bucket more carefully. They wait between pulls. They listen to the sound of water with attention that borders on professional interest. No one rushes the line. A line forms anyway. It always does. Order emerges because disorder would waste time and energy. Arguing does not add depth to a well. Everyone understands this without discussion. The absence of conflict is not kindness. It is logic. Late night history finds quiet satisfaction here. Scarcity handled calmly often produces fewer problems than abundance handled loudly. People wait because waiting is effective. Pushing does nothing. Complaining does nothing. Silence does not help either, but it does not hurt. The bucket rises slowly, not because the rope is weak, Because water responds better to patience. Spilled water is noticed immediately, not with anger, with disappointment. A spill is not a mistake. It is a loss. Loss is acknowledged quietly and then set aside. Children learn this early. They are given small containers first, not because they are trusted less, because spills matter. Their hands adjust, their movements slow. They learn that speed is rarely rewarded here. Precision is. Late night history avoids describing this as discipline. Discipline implies enforcement. What happens here is imitation. Children copy the pace they observe. They notice that careful movements earn nods rather than words. Approval is silent. That makes it effective. The well becomes a place of calculation, not numerical, physical. How much can be taken without drawing attention? How often trips must be made? How much water can be stretched across tasks? Washing becomes selective. Cleaning becomes strategic. Nothing is announced. Adjustments happen naturally because the body prefers not to repeat unnecessary labor. Water is reused without comment. A basin serves more than one purpose. A rinse becomes a wash. A wash becomes irrigation for a small plant near the doorway. This is not innovation. It is habit shaped by limitation. Late night history notices how language shrinks around water. People do not talk about it much. Talking invites worry. Worry wastes energy. The well is approached with the same respect given to tools. It is a resource. It is not a topic. The sound of the bucket changes as the level drops. A dull echo replaces a confident splash. This sound is recognized instantly. It tells the body how to move next. The rope is checked more often. Hands grip more carefully. No one says why. They do not need to. At certain hours, the well is avoided entirely. Not because it is empty, because it needs rest. This idea is not discussed. It is understood. Water replenishes slowly. Demanding it faster does not work. People learn to wait until evening or early morning when the well feels more generous. Late night history appreciates this cooperation with limits. It is not reverence. It is experience. As days pass, the routine becomes smooth. The well sets the pace of the village without issuing commands. Tasks align around its availability. Cooking adjusts. Cleaning adapts. Thirst is managed with awareness rather than indulgence. No one drinks deeply without pause. Sips are measured. The body is taught restraint gently. This is not suffering. It is calibration. The body learns how little it can accept and still function. That knowledge becomes valuable later. Children notice that adults drink last, not always, often enough to be meaningful. This is not presented as sacrifice. It is presented as order. Order maintains calm. Calm preserves cooperation. Late night history allows itself a small irony here. Water is most valued when it is least discussed. Silence protects it. Noise attracts attention, and attention invites misuse. At night, the well is quiet. The rope rests. The bucket dries. Water settles into itself underground. The village settles too. Thirst softens into sleep. Dreams do not linger on water. Dreams are efficient. Morning will bring the same routine. The well will offer what it offers. People will accept it without negotiation. There will be no speeches about conservation. Conservation is already practiced. Late night history remains by the well because it explains a great deal without saying much. Survival often depends not on finding more resources, but on learning how to approach them without haste. The well does not reward effort with abundance. It rewards patience with continuation. That is enough. And so the rope lowers again. The bucket rises again. The water is shared again, quietly, carefully, without hurry. The second use of everything. The night does not leave the well immediately. It lingers and follows the water back into the village. Late night history prefers this part of the story because it is where effort becomes repetitive rather than dramatic. After water is drawn, it does not disappear into celebration or waste. It enters a quieter phase, a second life. This is not innovation. It is fatigue given a method. When bodies are tired, they become efficient without trying. They stop performing and start conserving. The calm of the night makes this visible. Water does not rush here. Neither do the people who carry it. Once the bucket reaches the house, the work does not end. It simply changes shape. Water is poured carefully into containers that already know their purpose. No one asks what the water will be used for first. The order is established through habit. Drinking comes before everything else. Not because it is valued more, but because thirst is harder to postpone. After drinking, the water does not disappear. It waits. A small amount remains in the cup. This is not discarded. It is poured into another vessel. That vessel already contains the memory of previous days. Water collects there quietly. This is not cleanliness. It is preparation. Late night history avoids calling this recycling. That word suggests intention and pride. What happens here is simpler. People are tired. Tired people do not waste effort. Carrying water is effort. Repeating effort unnecessarily feels offensive to the body. So water is reused without commentary. Hands are washed sparingly, not ceremonially. Fingers are dipped, palms are rubbed briefly. The remaining water slides into a basin that waits nearby. This basin has seen many hands. It is not pristine. It does not need to be. Its purpose is to remove what matters most and ignore the rest. The basin water does not leave after this. It waits again. Perhaps it will rinse cloth later. Perhaps it will cool dust near the doorway. Perhaps it will be poured outside where plants accept whatever arrives without complaint. Water here is not assigned a single role. It adapts. Late night history notices how tiredness produces flexibility. When energy is abundant, people insist on order. When energy is scarce, order becomes fluid. Tasks overlap. Boundaries blur. A wash becomes a rinse. A rinse becomes irrigation. No one records this sequence. It changes daily. There is quiet humor in how thoroughly water is respected without being praised. No one lectures about its importance. No one teaches children long explanations. Children learn through watching hands pause before pouring anything away. They notice when adults hesitate. That hesitation becomes instruction. A child who spills water is not scolded harshly. Harshness would waste breath. Instead, the spill is addressed immediately. Hands move to gather what can be saved. Cloth absorbs what remains. The lesson is not delivered in words. It is delivered through movement. Late night history finds this effective. Movement teaches faster than speech. As days pass, the pattern becomes invisible. People no longer notice that water is being reused. It feels natural. A single use feels extravagant. The body adjusts its expectations. Washing less feels normal. Being slightly dusty feels normal. Thirst is managed rather than eliminated. This is not suffering. It is calibration. The body learns a narrower range of comfort and survives comfortably within it. Comfort expands and contracts more easily. than pride ever could. Water storage becomes a quiet priority. Containers are cleaned just enough. Clean enough is a useful phrase here. It appears often: clean enough, dry enough, full enough. Enough is the standard that governs everything this season. Late night history appreciates how enough replaces better. Better invites comparison. Enough ends the conversation. In the evenings, water use slows naturally. Darkness discourages unnecessary movement. People plan ahead. They drink slightly more before sleep. They rinse fewer things. They accept the presence of dust rather than challenge it. Sleep benefits from this acceptance. At night, the containers sit quietly. Water inside them reflects nothing. It waits. Tomorrow it will serve again. Not fresh, not celebrated, still effective. The idea of wasting water feels strange here, not immoral, illogical. Wasting effort feels worse than wasting objects. Objects can sometimes be replaced, effort cannot. Late night history notices how this logic spreads. Food scraps are reused, cloth is patched, tools are repaired. Everything is given a second role, not because someone planned it, but because stopping to plan would cost energy. Water simply makes this pattern obvious. By morning, the containers are lighter, not empty, lighter. That difference matters. Light enough to manage, heavy enough to matter. The well will be visited again, but not immediately. People wait. Waiting feels productive. Children wake with dry mouths and learned patience. They know water will come. They also know it will not come instantly. This knowledge does not upset them. It steadies them. Late night history lingers here because this is where survival becomes quiet. No slogans, no rules, just tired bodies making reasonable choices. The second use of water does not feel like sacrifice. It feels like relief. Relief from unnecessary repetition, relief from wasteful motion, relief from explaining anything to anyone. Water flows through the village slowly. It does not disappear. It changes purpose. It adapts. And when it is finally gone, it leaves no drama behind. Only a readiness to begin again. The rope will lower tomorrow. The bucket will rise. The water will work twice. And no one will feel the need to mention it at all. Meals that learned to speak less. The night does not ask what was eaten today. It only asks how quietly it was accepted. Late night history begins here because this is where effort stops pretending to be dramatic. The bowls are smaller now, not suddenly, not enough to justify comment, just small enough that hands notice before mouths do. This is the hour when hunger learns manners. Lamps are low, air is still. The day has already spent what it had. No one expects a surprise. The meal arrives anyway. Not generous, not apologetic, simply present. And presence is enough to keep the room calm. In this year, the portions change without announcement. No one gathers to explain the adjustment. Explanation suggests that someone expects resistance. Resistance would require energy. Energy is reserved for work. So the bowls arrive with slightly less, and everyone pretends not to notice. Pretending is easy when repetition has already done the explaining. Late night history appreciates this restraint. Hunger that arrives gradually learns to blend in. It stops making speeches. It stops demanding attention. It becomes a background condition like heat or dust. Noticeable but familiar. Meals continue on schedule. This matters. Routine reassures the body even when quantity shifts. Sitting together still happens. The act of eating together remains intact. Only the conversation thins. Words feel unnecessary. Chewing becomes slower, not for enjoyment, for duration. Stretching the moment matters more than enhancing it. No one reaches for seconds quickly, not because they are forbidden, because reaching too soon feels impolite to the room. The room has learned a new balance, and everyone senses it. Waiting becomes a courtesy. Courtesy costs nothing. Children adapt first. They always do. Their sense of enough adjusts quietly. They watch adults pause before serving themselves. They imitate that pause. This imitation is not taught, it is absorbed. Late night history prefers lessons delivered this way. They leave fewer scars. The food itself remains familiar. Grain, vegetables, simple preparations that do not require commentary. Familiarity prevents complaint. Complaints require comparison, and comparison requires memory of better times. Memory is tiring. Tonight no one feels like lifting it. There is a mild irony in how carefully the food is prepared despite its modest quantity. Care replaces abundance. Dishes are cooked evenly. Seasoning remains consistent. No one punishes the meal for being small. Punishment would be misdirected. Late night history finds something gentle here. When generosity disappears, attention often takes its place. A smaller bowl demands more awareness. Each bite matters, not symbolically, physically. The room responds accordingly. Eating becomes quieter. Utensils move slowly. No one scrapes the bottom too quickly. Finishing a bowl feels final in a way it did not before. Finality is accepted without drama. After the meal, bowls are cleaned carefully. Not thoroughly. Clean enough. Clean enough becomes a guiding principle this season. Thoroughness is expensive. Enough is affordable. Leftovers are measured with precision that does not feel obsessive. A small amount is saved if possible. Saved is an optimistic word. Held might be better. The future is not guaranteed, but the next morning usually arrives. Planning for it feels reasonable. Late night history avoids calling this frugality. Frugality implies choice. What happens here is alignment. The body aligns with reality, and reality does not negotiate. Hunger does not vanish after the meal. It softens. It moves to the edges. It becomes something the body can sleep beside without being kept awake. This is a skill learned over time. The body practices it quietly. Sleep comes easily. Not because people are satisfied, because fatigue has outpaced appetite. Dreams remain short. Rest is efficient. Efficiency matters more than comfort. Morning will bring the same pattern. Work first. Water next. Food later. Everyone knows this. Knowing reduces anxiety. Anxiety wastes energy. Energy is guarded. Late night history notices how the language around food shrinks. There are fewer comments about taste, fewer opinions. Food becomes function again. Function is dependable. Pleasure is optional. Children grow accustomed to this tone. They do not expect praise for eating less. They do not complain about hunger loudly. Hunger is discussed the way weather is. Briefly, practically, then set aside. There is no sense of punishment in this arrangement. No one believes they are being tested. The season did less. The river stepped back. The fields responded unevenly. Meals adjusted accordingly. This chain of cause and effect is understood even if never articulated. Late night history finds peace in this acceptance. There is no search for meaning here, only continuation. As the weeks pass, the smaller portions become normal. Normal is powerful. Normal erases resentment. What once felt reduced now feels standard. The body recalibrates, expectations narrow, calm expands. The room holds this change without comment. Walls do not echo hunger, floors do not judge portion size. The house simply contains another quiet meal. And when the bowls are finally empty, no one lingers over them. Empty bowls are not insults. They are signals that the day is done. Late night history stays here because this is where survival becomes quiet. No speeches, no lessons, just smaller meals eaten calmly. And tomorrow the bowls will return. Slightly light, completely sufficient, enough. Protein that stopped making appearances. The night does not notice what is missing until the table makes it obvious. Late night history likes this kind of absence because it arrives without noise, no announcement, no argument, just a pattern that quietly fails to repeat itself. The bowls look the same as yesterday. The grain smells familiar. The seasoning has not changed its mind, and yet something does not arrive. Not today, not yesterday either. Meat has learned how to stay away without being discussed. It does not vanish dramatically. It simply stops showing up often enough to feel optional. In this season, meat becomes a memory more than a habit. It appears occasionally, rarely enough to be noted, often enough to avoid panic. Its absence is not treated as loss. Loss suggests that something was promised. Meat never promised consistency. It was always dependent on luck and timing and a number of factors no one controlled. Now those factors are not cooperating. Late night history enjoys how calmly this is accepted. No one complains that meals are incomplete. Incomplete compared to what? Compared to which year? Memory is selective, and tonight it chooses not to argue. Grain takes the center quietly. It always has. Now it simply admits it. Bowls are filled with barley or wheat, prepared in ways everyone already understands. There is no experimentation. Experimentation requires surplus. Familiarity provides comfort without asking for attention. The seasoning remains the same. This detail matters. Salt still appears. Herbs still arrive in careful amounts. Flavor is not punished for the absence of meat. That would be misdirected frustration. Seasoning is allowed to remain consistent because consistency is grounding. The body appreciates signals that not everything has changed. Late night history finds mild irony here. When quantity decreases, attention to quality often increases, not as a luxury, as compensation. A smaller meal benefits from familiarity. The tongue notices patterns even when the stomach notices reduction. Meat appears only when conditions allow it. A successful catch. An animal that can no longer be spared the effort of care. These moments are not celebrated loudly. Celebration would exaggerate rarity. Instead, meat is integrated quietly into the routine. It becomes a variation rather than an event. Children notice immediately. They always do. Not because they are disappointed, because change attracts attention. They register the difference and then adjust. Their understanding of normal expands to include absence. This flexibility is not taught. It is natural. Late night history avoids framing this as deprivation. Deprivation implies expectation. Expectation implies entitlement. No one here feels entitled to meat. It was always conditional. Conditions are currently unkind. Grain meals stretch further, not because they are filling, because they are reliable. Reliability matters more than satisfaction this year. Satisfaction fades quickly. Reliability supports planning. Planning reduces anxiety. Anxiety wastes energy. The body adapts. It learns to extract more patience from fewer calories. This sounds dramatic when described directly. In practice, it feels mundane. People feel tired. They feel hungry. They also feel capable. Capability matters more than comfort. Late night history notices how little conversation centers on meat. There are no stories about when it will return, no speculation about next time. Speculation invites disappointment. Disappointment is inefficient. When meat does appear, it is portioned carefully, not ceremonially, carefully. Everyone receives a piece small enough to avoid guilt and large enough to avoid resentment. The balance is practiced. It has been rehearsed in other years. This year simply requires it more often. The presence of meat does not change the tone of the meal. No one eats faster, no one speaks louder. The meal remains calm. Calm protects order. Order protects cooperation. After the meal, the memory of meat fades quickly. Hunger does not linger on it. Hunger is practical. It focuses on what will arrive next. What will arrive next is grain. Late night history appreciates this clarity. There is no nostalgia here. Nostalgia complicates survival. The body does not romanticize protein, it evaluates it. Spices become more important, not because they add calories, because they add continuity. The taste remains anchored to earlier seasons, even as portions shrink. This anchoring stabilizes mood. Mood stability matters when effort is constant. Children grow up with this ratio quietly adjusted. Grain is primary, meat is supplemental. This understanding settles early and remains useful later. It produces adults who do not rely on abundance to feel normal. Late night history notices how this shift leaves no monument. There is no record marking the year when meat became rare. It simply becomes rare again, as it has many times before. History forgets these cycles because they do not escalate. Meals end the same way they always have. Bowls emptied, hands wiped, the room quiet. No one lingers over what was missing. Linger implies regret. Regret implies expectation. Sleep arrives easily, not because people are satisfied, because fatigue has priorities. Dreams do not include food often, dreams include rest. Morning will arrive with the same grains prepared the same way. The seasoning will taste familiar. The bowls will be slightly light. No one will comment. Late night history stays here because this is where adaptation hides. Not in innovation, not in complaint, in acceptance practiced quietly. Protein has stopped making appearances. Life has not. And the meal continues anyway. Numbers that refused to notice the river. The night grows quieter when paperwork arrives. Late night history enjoys this moment because it feels strangely heavier than physical labor. Hands that lifted tools all day now hold thin sheets that weigh more than expected. Lamps burn low, air barely moves. Outside, the river rests at a level that has already explained itself. Inside, the numbers behave as if nothing happened. This is the hour when effort meets arithmetic and loses. Not loudly, calmly. The kind of loss that does not argue back. The records arrive on time. They always do. Timing is their strongest quality. Pages are unrolled carefully, not because they are fragile, because respect for process still matters, even when outcomes disappoint. The ink does not change color for drought. The lines do not bend for low water. Columns remain straight. Totals wait patiently to be filled. Late night history finds something unsettling here. Nature adapts, bodies adapt, even tools adapt. Numbers do not. They sit confidently on the page as if the year performed exactly as instructed. There is no gathering to protest this. Protest requires belief in revision. Revision feels unlikely. The records were written elsewhere by people who will not see the fields or touch the soil. This distance protects the numbers from inconvenience. It also protects the people reading them from surprise. Surprise would suggest expectation. The task is not to argue with the records. The task is to respond to them. Response takes the form of quiet calculation. What can be given without collapse? What can be delayed without consequence? What can be reshaped to look sufficient? Late night history avoids dramatic language here. No one panics. Panic is inefficient. Panic invites attention. Attention invites scrutiny. Scrutiny invites punishment. Calm keeps options open. Households adjust silently. Consumption narrows further. Storage is reconsidered. Future meals are imagined more cautiously. None of this is declared. Declarations invite responsibility. Responsibility would require explanations that cannot help. The numbers remain unmoved. They do not acknowledge effort. They do not record exhaustion. They do not note how much soil resisted or how often water was reused. They simply wait to be satisfied. Late night history allows itself a quiet irony. The river does less, and everyone adapts. The numbers do not, and everyone else must adapt again. Adaptation has become the primary skill of the season. Some contributions are made in grain that should have lasted longer. Some are made in goods that were meant for other purposes. Nothing is given freely. Everything is calculated carefully. The goal is not generosity. It is survival. No one describes this as unfair. Fairness would require comparison. Comparison would require hope. Hope feels expensive tonight, and the process is slow, not deliberately, because moving too quickly risks mistakes. Mistakes invite correction. Correction invites attention. Attention is avoided. Late night history notices how silence becomes strategy. Conversations shorten. Words are chosen carefully. The fewer details offered, the better. Ambiguity provides space. Space allows time. Time sometimes solves problems that effort cannot. Children watch this quietly. They do not understand the numbers, but they understand tension. They notice when adults pause longer over documents than over meals. They notice how voices lower when records are discussed. These observations settle into memory without context. Context can wait. The records do not stay long. They never do. Once read, they leave behind consequences rather than explanations. The pages roll up again. The ink remains confident. The numbers do not apologize. Afterward, the village returns to routine. Work resumes. Water is drawn. Meals are prepared. The presence of obligation lingers like heat after sunset, felt but not visible. Late night history finds this persistence revealing. The system does not collapse under contradiction. It continues. People learn to exist within it rather than confront it. Confrontation would require leverage. Leverage is scarce. The irony remains gentle. The year demanded more effort and produced less return. The records demand the same return regardless. Consistency is their virtue. It is also their flaw. No one expects relief from these pages. Relief is imagined elsewhere. In weather, in time, in seasons that might behave differently. Numbers will not change. Only circumstances can. As days pass, the impact of the record spreads quietly. A little less food here, a little more work there. Adjustments ripple outward. No one traces them back to the page. Tracing would be exhausting. Late night history prefers to stay with the aftermath rather than the confrontation. The confrontation is brief. The aftermath lasts all year. There is no dramatic enforcement. No public spectacle. Compliance happens quietly because alternatives are worse. The cost of refusal is understood even if never described. At night, the numbers do not haunt dreams. Dreams are practical. They focus on rest, on routine, on getting through the next day. Arithmetic stays awake elsewhere. Morning arrives with the same tasks waiting. The records are already gone. Their effects remain. Late night history finds something darkly amusing in how invisible power becomes once it has done its work. The page leaves, the adjustment stays. The river will rise again someday. The soil will soften. The fields will respond. The numbers will still look the same. That consistency is both comforting and unsettling. And the village will continue adapting quietly because adaptation has proven more reliable than protest. The records did not notice the river. Everyone else did. And somehow life continues anyway. Silence that paid on time. The night settles after the pages are rolled away, and nothing dramatic happens. Late night history finds comfort in this anticlimax. The numbers have spoken. The river has already finished explaining itself. What remains is the space where reaction might have occurred but did not. No raised voices, no sudden gatherings, no gestures large enough to attract memory. This is the hour when restraint reveals itself as a skill rather than a mood. Silence fills the gap where rebellion is often expected, not because people are unaware, because awareness does not always lead to noise. Morning arrives without tension. Work resumes. Tools are lifted. Water is drawn. Meals remain measured. Nothing in the village suggests outrage. From a distance, it might appear that the records were welcomed. They were not. They were absorbed. Absorption is quieter than acceptance and far more effective. The adjustment begins immediately and without coordination. No one issues instructions. No one assigns roles. People simply begin doing less of what can be spared. Portions tighten slightly. Repairs are postponed again. A planned purchase is quietly abandoned. These changes are not discussed. Discussion would slow them down. Late night history prefers this kind of response. It lacks spectacle. It leaves little evidence. It works. Consumption narrows first, not because it is the most painful option, because it is the most flexible. Food portions adjust almost invisibly. No meal feels dramatically smaller than the last. The difference is cumulative. By the end of the week, the body has learned the new standard without protest. Clothing is worn longer. Tears are ignored until they cannot be. Footwear is repaired one more time than planned. Tools remain imperfect. Nothing breaks decisively. Everything survives just enough. No one frames this as sacrifice. Sacrifice suggests an audience. There is none. The adjustments are personal and quiet. Each household calibrates independently. The village remains coordinated without coordination. Late night history notices how efficiently silence spreads. When one household tightens its habits, others follow without comment. This is not imitation. It is recognition. Everyone is reading the same conditions. Everyone draws similar conclusions. Children sense the shift without being told. They notice that treats no longer appear casually. They notice that adults hesitate before offering extras. These observations settle into expectation quickly. No one explains why. Explanation would suggest that the situation is temporary. Temporariness is not assumed. Work continues at the same pace. No one withdraws effort as protest. That would be counterproductive. The system does not respond to withdrawal with mercy. It responds with pressure. Pressure is avoided. Late-night history allows itself a restrained smile here. The most effective resistance sometimes looks identical to cooperation. The difference exists only in intent, and intent leaves no footprint. Silence proves useful. It draws no attention. It invites no correction. The records have already moved on. No one returns to check the mood. Compliance is assumed and therefore left alone. Inside the houses, evenings remain calm. Conversation does not circle around the records. It would be pointless. Pointless conversations waste energy. Energy is already committed elsewhere. There is no sense of defeat. Defeat would require an attempt. No attempt was made to challenge the numbers. Instead, the village adjusts around them like water around stone. This is not submission, it is navigation. Late-night history finds this navigation more interesting than revolt. Revolt burns bright and ends quickly. Adjustment lasts. As weeks pass, the initial sting fades, not because conditions improve, because the body adapts. Adaptation reduces the feeling of loss. What once felt like reduction now feels normal. Normality is powerful. It erases resentment. The numbers remain unchanged. They do not acknowledge compliance. They do not reward silence. They simply remain satisfied. Satisfaction is their only emotion. People do not wait for gratitude. Gratitude would be suspicious. The system does not offer it. Expecting it would be naive. Children grow up watching this process repeat. They learn that loud reactions are not always effective. They learn that survival often depends on knowing when not to react. These lessons are not articulated. They are demonstrated. Late-night history notices how this quiet endurance never becomes a story. There is no marker noting the year the village adjusted instead of resisting. History prefers events. This was a process. At night, the village remains calm. Lamps are extinguished early, rest is prioritized. Tomorrow will require effort again. The records will not return, but their demands will echo. No one imagines that silence solved anything. It simply prevented things from becoming worse. Sometimes that is the goal. The river still sits lower than memory prefers. The fields still offer uneven returns. The numbers still expect consistency. None of this changes. What changes is the skill with which people move inside these constraints. Each day becomes slightly more efficient, slightly more careful, slightly less wasteful. Late-night history values these changes because they leave no trace for future observers. Archaeology will find broken tools and worn walls. It will not find restraint. It will not find silence. It will not find the thousands of small decisions that prevented collapse. And yet those decisions mattered more than any speech ever could. The village did not rebel. It adjusted. Quietly, effectively, and the night approved. Time that refused to become rest. The night arrives expecting very little and is rarely disappointed. Late-night history prefers this hour because nothing competes for attention anymore. The tools are set aside. The bowls are empty. The records have already spoken and moved on. What remains is a stretch of time that looks generous from a distance but behaves very differently once occupied. This is the moment people might call free time if they believed such a thing existed here. It does not. What exists instead is a narrow space between exhaustion and sleep, where the body powers down on its own terms. Evening does not offer entertainment. There is nothing scheduled to distract the mind, no performance waiting to be watched, no activity meant to refresh the spirit. Refreshment implies reserve energy, and reserves are thin. What evening offers instead is permission to stop. Stopping is not the same as resting. Stopping simply means The body has reached its limit for visible effort. People sit because standing requires attention. They sit where they happen to be rather than choosing carefully. Posture collapses naturally. Backs curve, hands rest without purpose. This is not comfort, it is gravity, finally being allowed to do its work. Late night history notices how quickly conversation fades during this hour. Not because there is nothing to say, because saying it would require effort that no longer feels reasonable. Words feel heavy. Silence feels efficient. Silence allows breathing to slow without commentary. Children reach this state first. Their energy disappears suddenly rather than gradually. One moment they are present, the next they are folded into stillness. No one instructs them to rest. Rest arrives before instruction can form. Adults follow more slowly. Their fatigue is layered. It takes longer to settle, but it settles just as deeply. This time is not celebrated. Celebration would require intention. Intention would require clarity. Clarity is absent. What people feel instead is a vague relief that nothing else is required. That relief is quiet. It does not lift mood. It simply lowers resistance. Late night history finds something unsettling here. The absence of leisure does not produce longing. It produces acceptance. When rest is scarce, the body learns to extract it from stillness rather than activity. People do not engage in hobbies. Hobbies assume surplus attention. Attention has been spent. They do not tell stories for amusement. Stories require energy to shape. Instead, memories drift through the mind uninvited and leave again without being held. There is a faint irony in how much this resembles peace. From the outside, it could be mistaken for tranquility. Lamps burn low, bodies are still. No conflict is visible, but this calm is not chosen. It is enforced by fatigue. Fatigue is a powerful organizer. It removes unnecessary motion without asking permission. Late night history avoids romanticizing this moment. It is not a reward for hard work. It is a consequence. The body has decided that any further engagement would cost more than it offers. Time stretches strangely here. Minutes feel longer, not because they are filled, because nothing marks their passage. There is no music, no game, no ritual, just the slow settling of breath, the gradual surrender to sleep. People remain awake longer than they expect, not because they are alert, because their minds are unwinding carefully. Thoughts slow down in stages. First, practical concerns fade, then planning dissolves. Eventually, even worry loses its grip. Sleep does not arrive suddenly. It arrives politely after confirming that nothing else demands attention. Late night history appreciates this politeness. Sleep here does not conquer. It waits until resistance has fully withdrawn. Children sleep deeply, adults sleep cautiously. Their rest is lighter, interrupted, still effective enough to continue. Effectiveness is the measure of success this season, not pleasure, not restoration, just enough recovery to repeat tomorrow. This hour leaves no trace. There is nothing to remember, no event to recall. Even the feeling of tiredness is replaced by sleep before it can be examined. Morning will arrive with the illusion of renewal. Illusion is sufficient. Late night history notices how this pattern repeats night after night without comment. No one complains about the lack of leisure. Complaints require comparison. Comparison would require imagining alternatives. Alternatives feel distant and unnecessary. The body learns to accept this narrow definition of evening. Sit, breathe, stop moving, sleep. The sequence becomes familiar enough to feel normal. Normality erases dissatisfaction. Children grow up believing this is what night is for. Not enjoyment, not reflection, just shutdown. This belief serves them well later. Expectation shapes disappointment. Low expectations produce stability. Late night history finds quiet humor in how efficiency replaces joy without being noticed. The body does not miss what it was never promised. As sleep finally settles, the room grows heavy with stillness. Breathing synchronizes. Muscles release their grip on the day. Nothing dramatic occurs. Nothing needs to. Tomorrow will ask for effort again. The river will still be low. The fields will still resist. The numbers will still expect compliance. Knowing this does not prevent sleep. It encourages it. This time was never meant to restore. It was meant to stop further loss. Late night history stays here because this is where endurance becomes invisible, not in work, not in hunger, but in the quiet acceptance of evenings that refuse to become rest. And yet they are enough. The body shuts down. The night holds. Nothing more is required. Stories that did not need an ending. The night reaches a point where even reflection feels unnecessary. Late night history recognizes this hour immediately. It is when the mind stops arranging events into meaning and allows them to sit as they are. The day has already spoken enough. Nothing more needs interpretation. Lamps remain low. Bodies are still. What remains is a thin space where stories might appear, if anyone felt the need to tell them. Tonight no one does, and that absence feels intentional rather than empty. Conversation does not disappear completely. It becomes smaller, quieter, shorter. Words are exchanged the way tools are shared, only when required, only when useful. A sentence might begin and end without decoration. No one elaborates. Elaboration would suggest excess energy or excess interest. Neither is present. Late night history finds this moment oddly honest. Stories are often told to escape repetition. Tonight, repetition does not feel threatening. Tomorrow is expected to resemble today closely enough to be predictable. Predictability is comforting when effort is constant. It allows the body to prepare without anxiety. People sit together without facing one another directly. Eyes rest on the floor or on nothing at all. Silence fills the room, but it is not heavy. It is practical. Silence requires no maintenance. It does not demand response. It allows the breath to slow naturally. Children notice this tone early. They begin to speak less, not because they are told to, but because they feel the room. They understand that nothing exciting is expected. They adjust accordingly. Their questions are postponed. Curiosity is still present, but it waits. Waiting feels appropriate here. Late night history avoids calling this dullness. Dullness implies dissatisfaction. What exists here is sufficiency. The day has been endured. That is enough of a narrative. If a story is told, it is brief. A small observation. A remark about weather or work. It does not seek laughter. It does not build tension. It ends quickly. The speaker does not wait for response. The story exists and then it does not. That feels correct. There is no effort to entertain. Entertainment would require contrast. Contrast would require something different tomorrow. Difference feels unlikely. So no one invests in embellishment. Late night history finds quiet irony in this restraint. In other times, people exaggerate the smallest event to make days feel distinct. Here, distinction is unnecessary. Similarity is not feared, it is expected. The mind begins to flatten experience. Moments blur gently, not because they lack meaning, but because meaning has already been extracted. What remains is repetition without friction. People do not reflect on the day. Reflection implies choice. Choice implies alternatives. Alternatives feel distant tonight. The body is satisfied with completion. Completion does not require analysis. As minutes pass, the room grows heavier with stillness. Someone shifts position. Someone else sighs softly. These sounds replace conversation. They communicate more accurately than words could. Late-night history appreciates this economy. When life is demanding, the mind learns to reduce unnecessary narrative. It stops insisting that every day must justify itself. Children drift towards sleep without protest. They do not ask for stories tonight. Stories would imply something unresolved. Nothing feels unresolved. Tomorrow will arrive with familiar tasks. Familiar tasks do not require explanation. Adults follow more slowly. Their thoughts linger briefly on practical matters, tools, water, food. Then those thoughts loosen their grip. Planning beyond the next day feels unnecessary. The next day is already understood. Late-night history notices how this acceptance settles without instruction. No one announces that repetition is acceptable. It simply becomes so. There is a quiet humor in how this moment would appear to an outsider. A room full of people saying very little, doing almost nothing. It might look empty. It is not. It is full of restraint. Restraint is not dramatic. It does not attract memory. That is why it works. As the night deepens, even these small sounds fade. Breathing synchronizes. The room becomes a shared space of rest rather than interaction. Stories are no longer expected. Late-night history stays here because this is where endurance becomes invisible. Not in effort, not in sacrifice. In the refusal to demand novelty from days that have already asked enough. Tomorrow does not need anticipation. It will arrive anyway. It will resemble today closely enough to require no preparation. This realization does not feel bleak. It feels stabilizing. When tomorrow is predictable, anxiety loses its leverage. The room accepts this quietly. Sleep arrives without ceremony. No one marks the transition. One moment eyes are open, the next they are not. Stories remain untold. Not because there are none, because telling them would change nothing. Late-night history finds peace in that restraint. Not every night requires a narrative. Not every day needs a lesson. Sometimes continuity is the achievement. The story does not end. It simply pauses. And in that pause, the body rests, which is enough. Health without a backup plan. The night arrives with a familiar heaviness that no one feels the need to explain. Late-night history prefers this hour because the body is more honest when it is tired. Lamps are low. The air feels still even when it moves. This is not the kind of night that announces illness or recovery. It is quieter than that. It is the kind of night where fatigue has become so ordinary that it no longer asks to be named. Tonight there is no diagnosis waiting in the dark, only a shared understanding that everyone is moving slower than they used to and that this slowness has stopped being surprising. In this year, health does not collapse, it thins. Strength does not disappear, it fades into something more economical. Bodies wake up tired and remain tired without drama. No one calls it sickness. That word would suggest urgency. Urgency would require response. Response would require resources. Resources are already committed elsewhere. So fatigue is called normal, and normal is accepted. Late-night history finds something unsettling in how quickly this adjustment settles in. A body that once complained loudly now complains softly or not at all. Muscles ache and then stop reporting it. Breath shortens and then adapts. Pain does not vanish. It becomes background noise. The kind you notice only when it briefly stops. People continue working because working feels safer than stopping. Stopping invites attention. Attention invites questions. Questions invite explanations that no one has the energy to provide. It is easier to move slowly than to justify stillness. Health here is not measured by comfort. It is measured by function. If a person can stand, they stand. If they can lift, they lift. If they can walk, they walk. Everything else is optional. There is no pursuit of wellness. Wellness implies optimization. Optimization implies excess. Excess is not available this season. Late-night history avoids romantic language here. There is no quiet heroism in enduring fatigue. There is only practicality. A body that still functions is a body that is used. Complaints are minimized not because they are unwelcome, but because they change nothing. Sleep does not restore the body fully. It softens the edges. Rest arrives, but it is partial. Mornings feel heavier than they should. Evenings arrive too quickly. Time compresses around effort. This compression becomes normal. Normality absorbs discomfort until it stops feeling remarkable. People notice this collectively. No one comments on how often others sit down. No one remarks on slower movements. Observation without judgment becomes a form of courtesy. Judgment would require comparison, and comparison would reveal that everyone is struggling in similar ways. Late-night history appreciates this restraint. When fatigue is shared, it loses some of its power to isolate. Everyone understands without explanation that this year is not kind to bodies. The understanding does not fix anything. It simply removes blame. Minor injuries linger longer than expected. A strained muscle remains strained. A cough returns more often than it should. No one tracks recovery carefully. Recovery is allowed to take as long as it takes. Monitoring it closely would create disappointment. There is no sense that health will suddenly improve. Improvement is imagined vaguely but not expected. Expectations are managed carefully. Managed expectations reduce frustration. Frustration wastes energy. As weeks pass, people adjust their pace further. Tasks are broken into smaller pieces. Lifting is shared more often. Work that requires endurance is rotated quietly. No one announces these changes. Announcements would draw attention to weakness. Weakness is not condemned here. It is anticipated. Late-night history finds this anticipation revealing. The weakest person in the room is treated with patience, not sympathy. Sympathy would imply exception. Exception would imply that weakness is unusual. It is not. Everyone understands that turns are taken. Today it is one body. Tomorrow it will be another. When someone slows down, there is no correction, no advice. Advice would imply that the problem is solvable. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes the body simply needs less demand placed on it. This is understood without discussion. Children observe this carefully. They notice that adults rest more often. They notice pauses between movements. They learn that strength is not constant. This lesson arrives early and remains useful. It produces patience rather than fear. Late-night history avoids framing this as decline. Decline implies direction. What exists here is fluctuation. Bodies rise and fall within narrow limits. The limits are accepted. No one expects a return to previous capacity. Expecting that would be exhausting. Meals do not restore energy dramatically. Food helps, but not enough to reverse the pattern. Hunger and fatigue overlap in uncomfortable ways. The body chooses which to prioritize. Often it chooses sleep. Sleep does what it can. There are no remedies pursued enthusiastically. Remedies require belief. Belief requires optimism. Optimism feels risky this year. Instead, there is maintenance. Drink water, eat when possible, rest when allowed, avoid injury. This checklist replaces aspiration. Late night history finds dry humor in how this resembles modern advice delivered without enthusiasm. The basics are followed not because they promise improvement, but because they prevent collapse. Prevention is valued more than progress. Illness does not arrive dramatically. It drifts in quietly. A person misses a day of work, then returns slower. No one interrogates the absence. Absence is understood. When the person returns, they are given lighter tasks without discussion. This adjustment is temporary or permanent depending on the body. No one decides in advance. The idea of fairness does not appear often. Fairness would require measuring effort precisely. Measurement would reveal imbalance. Imbalance would require correction. Correction would require resources. Resources are limited. So fairness is replaced by tolerance. Late night history finds this substitution effective. Tolerance keeps the system moving. It allows uneven contribution without conflict. It acknowledges that bodies are unreliable without punishing them for it. As the season continues, fatigue becomes a constant companion. It is no longer noticed as a problem. It is noticed only when it increases. Even then, it is treated cautiously. A deeper fatigue signals that something must be adjusted. Work is reduced slightly. Rest is extended slightly. Life continues. There is no fear of weakness here. Weakness is familiar. It is shared. It is expected. Fear would require imagining collapse. Collapse is not happening. Everything is simply slower. At night, bodies settle into sleep with little resistance. Sleep is not celebrated, it is used. Dreams are shallow. The mind does not wander far. It conserves energy the way the body does. Morning returns with predictable heaviness. No one is surprised. Surprise would imply hope. Hope has been reallocated to more practical uses. Late night history lingers here because this is where survival becomes medical. Without medicine, there is no cure being pursued. There is only adaptation. Adaptation does not make headlines. It does not attract memory. It simply works. The year passes with no health crisis worth recording. There are no dramatic recoveries, no sudden declines. Just a steady negotiation between what bodies can do and what life requires. Those who are weaker are not blamed. Blame would imply choice. Choice is limited. Everyone understands that weakness rotates. Today one person needs rest. Tomorrow another will. This understanding creates a quiet solidarity that does not speak its name. Late night history finds something deeply human in this arrangement. Health is not treated as a moral quality. It is treated as a condition. Conditions change. People adapt. When the season eventually loosens its grip, there will be no celebration of recovery. Bodies will simply feel slightly lighter. Movements will require less effort. No one will mark the moment. Marking it would feel unnecessary. Until then, fatigue remains ordinary. Weakness remains tolerated. Life continues without a backup plan for health. And somehow that is enough, and the body does not need to be strong. It only needs to be allowed to continue, quietly, without judgment. And late night history stays with it in the dark. A season that did not ask to be remembered. Nothing announces the ending. That is the first thing worth noticing. Late-night history prefers endings like this because they do not interrupt sleep. There is no final sound to mark the moment, no gesture large enough to separate one day from the next. The river does not return dramatically. It simply rises when it is ready. Or perhaps it does not rise much at all. Either way, the season loosens its grip without ceremony. The night accepts this quietly. Endings that demand attention rarely last. Endings that pass unnoticed tend to stay longer in the body. There is no date that can be circled. No line drawn to say before this and after this. The low water season ends the way it lived, gradually, without explanation. People do not gather to discuss it. Discussion would suggest that something important has changed. What has changed is small, subtle, almost polite. The river decides and no one argues. The water moves slightly differently. The sound shifts. The bank looks less exposed. Mud behaves more generously. These changes are observed without excitement. Excitement would imply relief. Relief feels excessive. The season did not hurt anyone dramatically. It simply asked more and gave less. That kind of season does not deserve applause when it leaves. Late-night history notices how quickly attention moves elsewhere. Fields are worked the same way they were yesterday. Tools are lifted with the same care. Meals remain modest. The habits learned during scarcity do not vanish overnight. Habits rarely do. They linger even after their original purpose fades. This is how seasons leave traces, without monuments. The village remains. This is important. Houses did not disappear. Walls still stand. Cracks remain where they formed. Some repairs were made, others were postponed. Nothing collapsed. Nothing was rebuilt completely. The architecture holds the memory of endurance better than words ever could. People remain too. They are thinner in ways that are not measured, slower in ways that no one criticizes, alive in ways that feel unremarkable. Survival here does not ask to be admired. It prefers not to be noticed. Children continue growing without marking the year as special. For them, this was simply how things were. Their sense of normal expanded quietly and will likely never shrink again. This is how memory is shaped without being stored. It settles into expectation rather than story. Late-night history finds this deeply unsettling in a gentle way. Entire seasons can pass without becoming narratives. They do not teach lessons. They do not warn future generations. They simply exist and then stop insisting. Most history lives this way. Only a small portion is allowed to become loud. There is no celebration of endurance. Endurance is not a performance. It is a condition. Applause would feel inappropriate. The people who lived through this season do not feel victorious. Victory implies an opponent. The river was not an opponent, it was itself. The night holds this understanding easily. Darkness is good at remembering things that daylight forgets. Daylight prefers events. Darkness prefers patterns. When the season ends, there is no rush to forget it. Forgetting would require effort. It fades naturally as attention shifts. The body adjusts to slightly easier work. The mind releases a fraction of tension. No one points this out. Pointing it out would turn relief into expectation. Expectation is handled cautiously. Late-night history stays here because this is where perspective softens. Looking back does not reveal drama. It reveals continuity. The same people, the same spaces, slightly altered by necessity, slightly wiser in ways that will never be articulated. No one writes this season down. There is nothing obvious to record. A note saying the river was low would feel insufficient. A note saying life continued would feel redundant. So nothing is written. Future years will not mention this one. They will mention years when things broke or burned or changed suddenly. Quiet years do not attract ink. They attract muscle memory. The night remembers instead. It remembers the slower pace, the careful use of water, the smaller meals eaten calmly, the silence that paid on time, the fatigue that became normal. These details do not survive daylight easily. They survive in the dark where comparison is unnecessary. Late night history does not try to extract meaning here. Meaning would feel forced. This season does not ask to be interpreted. It asks to be acknowledged briefly and then released. The river continues as it always does. The village continues because it has learned how. Houses wait patiently for the next adjustment. Bodies rest when allowed. Work resumes without commentary. Nothing dramatic happened. That is not a failure of history. It is one of its most common shapes. This season did not end with a lesson. It did not begin with a warning. It occupied time and then stepped aside. And that is enough. The village remains. The houses remain. The people remain. History does not write it down, but the night remembers quietly, without insisting, and then it lets go.